Valheim is an early access open world Viking themed survival game released on Steam on February 2nd, 2021, featuring both solo and co-op play with up to 9 other players. Since Valheim launched, it has seen some incredibly positive feedback, which is quite rare to see for an early access survival game. But not surprising either, as the bar has been set incredibly low by hundreds, if not thousands of Rust and Minecraft clones. So why is Valheim such a success? What are the game's biggest drawbacks? And most importantly of all, is it worth your money? That's what we'll be covering in this video, so when you're ready, grab your cup of tea, sit back, relax, and enjoy. As an avid survival game player, I was obviously interested in this game, and it would just be a matter of time before I bought it. And a week after release, I decided to pull the trigger, and I'll be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect. The reason for this being is my many previous experiences with early access games being quite disappointing. These games would have a good trailer, but as soon as you launched the game and started playing the game would feel dull and soulless. Basically, the cover art was amazing, but the book itself was horrendous. Valheim, however, was not one of those games. Valheim is a game much like other survival games that has all the basic survival elements, but the difference here is that Valheim hits the 5 key points to being a good survival game. Namely, a fitting atmosphere, shelter building and creativity, a good difficulty scale, that in fact also includes multiplayer, a good progression system, which I will touch on a little bit later, and a unique setting or focus. Not just being a Minecraft clone, because that's what pretty much 90% of the survival games go for, is like, okay, what do we want? Blocks, base building, and zombies. Bada bing bada boom. Survival game done. Valheim's unique focus is Viking mythology, where monsters and bosses are smoothly tied into the progression system, where you physically can't really progress any further until you've defeated them, as they drop essential items. Like the atlas from the first boss, which are used to create your first pickaxe, that is used to get bronze. Or the swamp key from the second boss, which allows you to start exploring the ancient crypts in the swamp biome for iron scraps. This type of progression system encourages you to prepare and take on these bosses, as you really need their drops, which leads to the kill feeling all the more satisfying. And this game doesn't hold your hand whatsoever. You don't know that you can craft a pickaxe from killing the first boss until you've killed it, because once you do kill it and you pick up the items, that is when you get the crafting recipe. This is a game where you have to learn in the game itself to understand the gameplay and get better. My older and younger brother and I started exploring straight away, and this might not have been the ideal decision since we didn't even have any armor. We just had our tunic, no leather, no nothing. We just went out with our clubs and axes, and we realized that this world was really harsh. Even the trees want to kill you. When they're rolling on the floor, they can still kill you. This game does not mess around. Now, about an hour into the game, we encountered our first troll, and we did what every human being would do, which is shoot an arrow at its face. Now keep in mind, we barely had anything, no proper armor, no proper weapons, and we are already fighting this big chunky boy, and it was honestly quite the challenge. We had to set up a base camp with beds to respawn and to craft more arrows to kill this troll. And it took us about 40 minutes of kiting him around and crafting weapons until we finally took it down, and oh boy, was that satisfying. Now, we set up our first base in the Black Forest biome, and that was never really the right decision, as we were pretty much undergeared. We didn't have any leather armor, we were just building our base there, and we kept getting assaulted by these waves and waves of grey dwarves, and it kind of turned into not a hard survival game, but more an annoying survival game, as we kept getting bombarded with spawn after spawn of these annoying grey dwarves, which honestly are comparable to mosquitoes, and even though we had a wall, it didn't matter. They just kept coming in, they kept destroying our stuff, and it was just tedious. After moving our base camp from the Black Forest to the edge of the Black Forest in the meadows, it was just much better, and the game started to be fun again. We started exploring these crypts, which are really tough. If you don't have any armor, these skeletons will pretty much one-hit you or two-hit you, especially if you don't have high health because of the food you ate. It's just it's fun, it's hard, it isn't easy. Like I said, this game isn't holding your hand, and you really have to adapt to become better at this game. It's supposed to be hard because a survival game is about survival. It isn't about sitting on the couch and just vibing in your house, although you could just focus on building in this game if you'd like to, but at some point that might not suffice. Now, there are some things in this game I really dislike, which are: 1, the fact that you can't eat multiple types of food constantly. You have this thing about having to have a varied diet, which does make sense, but at the same time, why? Why wouldn't you be able to eat multiple berries? It doesn't make that much sense to me. It's not a system I really particularly like. The second is the stamina system, which I think is balanced around mining resources. If you're swinging your weapon like 3 or 4 times, your character's already tired, which... for someone from this age who is working for all of his food, cutting trees every day, hunting animals, why is he so weak? Why is his physical condition so bad? It's more of an annoyance because you have to kite around enemies while walking and then sprinting a little bit to recharge your stamina and then slap them again with your axe or other weapons. But when you're swimming, you can physically swim 50 meters and then your character starts drowning and losing health because your stamina is at 0. Look, I understand that people from that age probably couldn't swim, but this is a little ridiculous because sometimes you can struggle getting across a rather wide river. And the third is character weight. While not per se a big issue, this is something I would have liked to see being an upgradable thing, where if you train it, you're able to carry more, or you're able to upgrade your character's stats like in Ark Survival Evolved. Sometimes it feels like 300 is a little too low in terms of weight, especially if you're a solo player. It doesn't really matter as much for multiplayer, but if you're a solo player, I would prefer to have a little bit more weight, especially when you're grinding the Bronze Age, which is really, really grindy. Because you need 2 copper ore and 1 tin ore, then you need to smelt those into bars, and then you can make 1 bronze bar. That's a lot of work compared to the iron bars, which only require 1 scrap per bar. That progression part of the game doesn't really make sense to me. We do have to keep in mind though that this is an early access game. It's a game that is still in development, and yet it feels, apart from the minor inconsistencies and annoyances, like a proper fleshed out game. There's a lot of content to be played in this game. I only have about 19.5 hours in this game, but there's so much more to be done. There's so many more biomes to explore, and there's just a lot more content for me to play. I can easily see myself getting 40 to 50 hours in this game before finally feeling like I've completed at least 1 map after killing all the 5 bosses currently in the game. And most likely it's going to take even longer than that, because if I want to make a nice looking outpost, I'm going to have to play a little longer, because creating a good outpost in this game does take time as it is grindy, but it's worth it as it feels rewarding. With that being said, I'd like to go over some pros and cons. This game is some really solid bang for your buck, as you can get a lot of hours out of this game despite it only having released a few weeks ago and it costing 16.8 euros. 16 euros and 80 cents for a game like this is an absolute steal. The portal system in this game encourages you to create different outposts, and it's actually a really nice system for you to teleport around different biomes. The setting of this game and the style of the graphics is quite unique, or at least it feels that way, so that's a big pro in my book. The atmosphere, despite not looking as creative and as detailed as other games, does feel immersive. This game is really hard, and that's a good thing because a survival game is supposed to be hard. The bosses aren't pushovers either, which makes them actually feel like bosses and not just bigger enemies that are massive piñatas. As previously mentioned, the progression system is quite nice, and I like that they integrated the bosses in the progression system. It is quite addictive after the Bronze Age as well. Exploring is rewarding if you do end up finding new biomes, because the materials and resources there are of higher level. And finally, the soundtracks are really well done, especially the boss ones. As for cons, the stamina bar depletes way too quickly, especially if you don't have good food, and it just doesn't feel right that you're kiting around enemies constantly until you regen stamina to then hit them again, then kite them around again. It doesn't feel right. The map is unnecessarily large. It really didn't need to be that big, unless you're playing with like 30 players, which you can't, and even then it's just absurdly large. The building snapping system could use some work, and the building system in general could use some work, but for an early access game, it's It's alright actually. The worst part of this game in my opinion was the bronze grind. It absolutely sucked and it wasn't very fun, and iron seems a lot easier to obtain compared to bronze, because bronze requires both 2 copper and 1 tin, and you need coal which you need to cut wood for. It's just way too much for such an early game resource. Why isn't an end game resource grindier than an early game resource? It doesn't make sense, as the other ores are always 1 ore is 1 bar, and the bronze one isn't. Like, why? Once you're out of bronze in your Black Forest, you're going to have to move to another biome, especially if you didn't have that many spawns, which means another outpost, which means more grinding, which it just didn't feel right, which leads to my other 2 cons being weight management and the game being slightly grindy. So if you don't like grindy games, this might not be the one for you. Now, generally all survival games are grindy, but the best ones make the grind not feel like a grind. Like, most of the time, the later game stuff in Ark Survival Evolved doesn't really feel like a grind to me. All things considered, Valheim is a tremendously good survival game when compared to other early access games of the past few years, and 100% worth your money, given that you are a survival game fan. If you aren't a fan of the genre, I don't believe this will be the game that will make you like the genre. I'd personally give that title to a game like Subnautica. At this point, it's wait and see to see what the developers will do with this game in the future given their current success, which hopefully doesn't ruin what they have created so far. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like down below and maybe even consider subscribing, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.